A city, quiet and unassuming, had been living its ordinary days without incident. But one morning, people awoke to find small objects missing from their homes: keys, spoons, even family photographs. At first, it seemed trivial, an innocent misplacement. Yet as days passed, the disappearances grew bolder. Windows were left ajar, yet no one had entered. Shadows seemed to linger unnaturally in the corners, stretching longer than daylight should allow. A group of neighbors convened, sharing accounts of the vanishing items. One elderly woman whispered about a feeling of weight in her chest, as if something invisible pressed down when she tried to move through her home. A child reported seeing a figure, vague and blurry, at the foot of his bed, disappearing when he blinked. By nightfall, the quiet of the city became ominous. Streetlights flickered in patterns that felt intentional, guiding no one but themselves. A soft scratching echoed from walls, as though something within the structure was moving with intent. Those who ventured outside felt unseen eyes watching, tracing their steps from alley to alley. A journalist, curious and brave, decided to investigate the growing mystery. Entering one abandoned warehouse at the edge of town, she noted the air was unnaturally cold, almost viscous. She could hear the faint metallic creak of an object moving, though nothing was visible. Her flashlight flickered, revealing long shadows that seemed to mimic her movements, then break away when looked at directly. Her camera captured fleeting images, distorted figures, black shapes that seemed to pulse and twist. She returned home, shaken, but the sense of being followed persisted. Every door she opened had a lingering chill, every mirror reflected not only her own face but something hunched behind her, vanishing when she turned. The city council dismissed the reports as hysteria, but the journalist knew better. She documented every detail, every sound, every vanished object. And when night fell, she too felt it, the presence in her home, patient, silent, waiting for her awareness to waver. The next morning, reports multiplied. Entire rooms seemed to shift overnight, furniture rearranged, personal belongings scattered, even doors opening to walls that weren't there the day before. The journalist returned to the warehouse, determined to find a clue. Her flashlight swept across the room, and she froze. Faint scratches lined the walls, forming symbols that seemed to writhe under her gaze. The air was thick and metallic, and she felt a pressure behind her, as though the building itself exhaled against her spine. A whisper, barely audible, murmured her name. She spun, seeing only the shadows of broken crates and cobwebs. But the sense of eyes, countless, unblinking, persisted. By midday, more residents reported missing items, now including larger objects, bicycles, small furniture, even family pets. Panic began to ripple through the city. People avoided their homes after sunset, leaving doors locked and lights blazing, but the disappearances continued. A sense of dread spread, thickening the air like smoke. The journalist gathered a group of volunteers to investigate. Each person carried cameras, recording devices, anything to document the phenomenon. As they stepped into the largest apartment building downtown, the temperature dropped sharply. Their breaths condensed in the air, forming clouds that lingered unnaturally. Shadows shifted against walls even when no one moved. Suddenly, one volunteer screamed. Something unseen had tugged at their leg, almost playful yet aggressive. The others saw nothing, but the sensation of an invisible hand brushing past their skin sent shivers down their spines. The journalist documented everything, noting patterns. The disturbances intensified at night, targeted specific rooms, and seemed to anticipate human movement. The city's power grid flickered sporadically. Lights pulsed in rhythm with a low, guttural hum that resonated through the buildings. Even electronic devices began malfunctioning. Phones displayed static, cameras distorted images, and computers froze mid-task. The unseen presence wasn't just in homes, it had extended across the city. By the end of the evening, the journalist and her team returned to their safe base, exhausted. Yet none could shake the feeling of being watched. Doors that had been locked in the morning were now slightly ajar. Shadows lingered longer than natural. And somewhere in the distance, a faint metallic scraping hinted that the entity was moving, observing, and patient. Night fell with unnatural swiftness. The journalist and her volunteers decided to stake out one of the affected buildings. Armed with cameras and voice recorders, they moved silently through the dimly lit corridors. Every creak of the floorboards echoed like thunder, each shadow seemed to stretch unnaturally long. A low, distorted whisper followed them, seemingly coming from the walls themselves. It formed words that were just out of comprehension. Leave, stay, look. The voices layered over one another, overlapping, impossible to decipher fully, but chilling to the bone. In one apartment, they discovered shattered furniture arranged into patterns, almost ritualistic. Symbols scraped into walls glowed faintly, as if reacting to their presence. One volunteer tried to photograph them, but the camera displayed nothing. When he lowered it, the symbols appeared even brighter to the naked eye. A sudden crash echoed from the next apartment. They rushed to investigate, finding nothing but a cold, dark room. Yet footprints, small, unnatural, smeared with dark liquid, led from one side of the apartment to the other, disappearing into thin air. Panic rose. The volunteers realized the entity could manipulate both space and perception. As hours passed, the journalist's team felt exhaustion, but sleep was impossible. Shadows seemed to cling to corners, drifting even when the lights were on. One team member claimed to see a face pressed against a window. No one was outside. Another felt something brush against their back repeatedly, leaving cold, wet impressions on their clothes. The entity began to communicate more clearly, albeit cryptically. Symbols shifted in real time as if aware of the observers. Drawers opened slightly, then slammed shut. Lights flickered in Morse-like patterns, seemingly forming a code. The team attempted to decode it but could only piece together fragmented warnings. Do not search, it sees, it waits. Suddenly, one of the volunteers vanished. The others heard a metallic scrape, followed by a faint, wet gurgle. A search revealed nothing, only a darkened corridor stretching farther than physically possible. Panic set in. The realization dawned, they were being hunted, watched, and manipulated by something beyond comprehension. By midnight, the mansion-like presence extended its influence over the entire block. Objects floated momentarily, then fell, rearranging themselves. The team attempted to escape, but doors led them in circles, hallways twisted impossibly. Every exit seemed just out of reach. Finally, the journalist activated every recording device simultaneously, hoping to capture evidence of the entity. The recordings produced only distorted noises, overlapping whispers, scraping, metallic clatters, and fleeting glimpses of movement, shapes too fast to track, faces too grotesque to focus on. The entity's patience was infinite, its game had only begun. Fatigue weighed heavily on the remaining journalists. Every corridor, every shadow, seemed to conspire against them. They stumbled upon an abandoned storage room, filled with dusty crates and broken furniture. Yet, the air was alive with movement, the faint rustling of something unseen brushing against the objects. A thick, metallic stench filled the room, causing one volunteer to gag. Shapes flickered at the edge of vision, humanoid but grotesquely twisted, with elongated limbs and glistening, bloodied faces. One shadow paused, tilted its head, and disappeared when anyone tried to focus on it. The journalist attempted to communicate with the entity using a voice recorder, speaking questions aloud. The response was instantaneous. A series of scratches and thuds echoed, forming patterns on the walls, almost like a sinister message. The words were fragmented, chilling. You intrude, you watch, you belong. A sudden cold swept through the room. Objects floated briefly: books, a chair, a shattered mirror, then slammed to the floor with deafening crashes. Panic erupted as whispers filled every corner, layering over each other, pleading, laughing, threatening. One volunteer, separated from the group, cried out. The journalist ran to them, only to see the figure vanish into a wall, leaving behind a smear of dark, viscous liquid. The floorboards creaked beneath invisible footsteps. Every direction seemed distorted. A corridor that had led to the exit minutes ago now twisted into an endless loop. They tried to use flashlights, cameras, anything to find an escape, but the light bent unnaturally, shadows swallowing the beams. Every doorway led to new horrors. Rooms filled with floating, bloodied objects, walls etched with pulsating symbols, and distorted reflections of themselves in shattered mirrors. The presence's power was undeniable. It controlled perception, distorted time, and manipulated space. Exhaustion and fear began to blur reality. The journalist struggled to distinguish hallucination from actuality. Each sound, each movement suggested that the entity was near, always watching, always testing. In a desperate act, they attempted to barricade themselves in the largest room. But the presence seeped through the tiniest cracks, infiltrating the room with whispers, cold drafts, and glimpses of grotesque faces. They realized survival depended on cunning, speed, and absolute silence. Any noise, any sudden movement invited attention. By the end of the segment, the journalists understood one horrifying truth: the entity's patience was eternal. It did not need to attack directly, it only needed to manipulate, scare, and wait. And it had already marked them, ensuring that every step forward in their investigation only deepened their entanglement in its dark domain. The journalists' panic deepened. Every attempt to retrace their steps led them into new hallways, twisting and folding like the mansion itself had become a living labyrinth. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting subtly, forcing the group to stumble or collide with one another. From the shadows, whispers emerged, more coherent now, forming fragmented phrases. You cannot leave, you belong, the walls remember. The voice was layered, some syllables human, others alien, resonating in their bones. One journalist noticed a dark figure perched atop a stairwell, hunched and grotesque. Its face glistened with blood, eyes hollow yet glowing faintly. It did not move at first, only observing. When anyone looked directly at it, it vanished into the darkness, leaving only the smell of iron and decay. As they pressed forward, floorboards cracked unnaturally under invisible weight. Faint, bloody handprints appeared on walls, seeming to pulse with a rhythm like a heartbeat. A sense of being watched intensified, every shadow potentially hiding the entity. Desperate, they tried to communicate with one another, but voices sounded distorted, distant, as if traveling through thick water. Every step felt slowed, time stretched unnaturally, minutes lasting hours. Their minds began to fray, merging fear and reality into a continuous, unrelenting terror. Suddenly, a door slammed open, revealing a room illuminated by a faint, greenish glow. Inside, the remnants of past victims lay in twisted, unnatural positions. Shadows crawled over their bodies, whispering secrets that made the journalists recoil. The air thickened, making breathing difficult. One brave journalist attempted to confront the entity, raising a flashlight. The beam illuminated the creature for a brief moment. Its skin was decayed and blackened, eyes lifeless yet piercing, its mouth twisted in a permanent, horrifying grin. Before any response could be made, it vanished again, leaving a wet, blood-like residue on the floor. The remaining journalists understood that escape would not be simple. The mansion anticipated their actions, altered its layout, and manipulated the environment to instill maximum fear. Every choice now carried consequences, and the entity's presence was patient, calculating, eternal. By the end of this segment, the group had realized the terrifying truth: the mansion was not just haunted, it was alive, sentient, and malevolent. It didn't need to attack to control them, fear was its weapon, and patience its greatest ally.